Welcome YouTube to the Cerberus RX channel, and welcome Ascenders to another Slay the Spire video, this time in the Ascender's Guide to the Spire video series. If you're new to Slay the Spire, or just need a refresher, there are 20 Ascensions, or difficulty modifiers, that stack cumulatively. Ascension 20 is the final Ascension, containing the difficulty modifiers from all 19 previous Ascensions, including its own. Defeating the semi-secret Act 4 boss, the Corrupt Heart, on Ascension 20 is considered the ultimate challenge for most Ascenders, including myself. In this series, we will dissect each Ascension one by one so that you will have all the knowledge at your disposal to accomplish this daunting feat. And in this video, we will discuss Ascension 17, which reads, normal enemies have more challenging abilities and movesets. Specifically, we will discuss the changes to Act 1 normal enemies. Some of these changes you may be well aware of, and others may be a complete surprise, even after thousands of hours and runs. Now, let's get into it, and I hope you enjoy the video. Hey, Cerberus RX here. This document that you're looking at has the attack patterns for every normal enemy for Act 1. I made it using information mostly from the Slay the Spire wiki and this Reddit post for cross-reference. A big shout out to those resources as they were invaluable in the making of this video. Links to them, as well as my document, can be found in the description, and we are going to use this document to go through the normal enemies of Act 1 and see how Ascension 17 has changed them, and then rank their buffs on a tier list. Starting off this list appropriately with the Cultist, one of the first early encounters. Their pattern is straightforward, but so is their buff. Their incantation that they always use turn 1 grants an additional unit of ritual, meaning they gain 5 strength at the beginning of their turn, instead of 4. This buff does not increase the number of turns it would otherwise take to defeat them, and only translates to a few additional points of damage received by the player. D tier buff. Jawworm is next. Another potential early first encounter. This guy is a threat even in lower ascensions, and actually receives a respectable buff to Bellow. In my opinion, the 3 additional block is far more frustrating than the additional 1 strength, because the additional block has the potential to delay the number of turns it takes to defeat it, significantly increasing the damage received by the player. The attack pattern though is left unchanged. This is a nonetheless modest buff to an already threatening enemy, so I have to place this in C tier. The louses, either 2 green or 2 red or 1 of each, are another potential early first encounter. The red louse is slightly more offensive, having access to grow, which is slightly buffed in Ascension 17 to grant 1 more strength. The red louse now also attacks more frequently because it cannot use grow twice in a row. But the real problem here is the significant buff to curl up, granting at least 9 block on hit, effectively granting the louses an extra turn to act. The green louse is more defensive, disruptive, with access to spit web, which oddly is not buffed in Ascension 17 to apply an additional round of weak similar to its crimson brother. It does attack more frequently though, because Spitweb can also not be used twice in a row. The combination of increased longevity and more offensive moveset makes this a B tier buff to an otherwise underwhelming early encounter. And I will have to place the green louse behind the red louse due to the lack of buff to Spitweb. The large acid slime is only acidic in name, as its buff is rather basic. Actually, it's really not even a buff, it's more like a downgrade. It's a small 10% shift, favoring the more disruptive move Corrosive Spit at the cost of Tackle. This does not change the likelihood of calling the non-damaging move Lick though. Overall, this means the large acid slime will actually be doing less damage because Tackle does 6 more damage. Compared to the previous Ascensions, this might even be viewed as a downgrade. I'm not really sure what the developers were doing here. I have to place this in F tier. Next is the medium acid slime. The attack pattern has changed on Ascension 17, similar to the large acid slime, but this time, the frequency of the non-damaging move Lick has actually been decreased from 30 to 20%. This means that the medium acid slime actually attacks more frequently and is more aggressive than its larger counterpart. However, this is kind of still a meager buff, D tier. The small acid slime is next. There's not much to buff here, honestly, but the small slime now always starts with Lick, and buffs that change attack patterns to make certain moves always used on the first turn are generally quite strong buffs, as you will see, especially coming in Act 2. The small slime is almost always paired with other enemies, and the weak will significantly reduce AoE damage. A small but meaningful buff. C tier. The large spike slime is next, and the buff to it is very substantial. 1. The non-damaging Lick now cannot be used twice in a row. This means that it attacks more frequently, and to compensate for being called less, it applies an additional round of Frail. This means that the player will still likely retain at least one turn of Frail into the fight with the two medium spike slimes after the large splits. Definitely an A tier buff. Similarly, the medium spike slime is next. Only the attack pattern here is changed, similar to its larger counterpart. Lick cannot be used twice in a row. However, note, no additional turn of Frail, so I will have to place this a tier lower in the C tier. Super easy here. The small spike slime has no changes, fitting squarely in the no changes tier. These guys are not fun. The fungi beasts are encountered mid to late Act 1. In a pair, they are a potentially nasty and dangerous encounter, especially with some bad RNG. They are technically buffed in Ascension 17. Note that Grow grants an additional strength which can be increased further by the vulnerable that is applied upon their defeat. However, because they are encountered later in Act 1, the player generally has more tools at their disposal to deal with them. Rather than the few additional points of damage that they may deal, it's more so a question of whether the tools were drawn at the right time that ends the run. This is a D tier buff. The Looter is next, and only receives a buff to steal 5 more gold when attacking the player. While technically a buff in concept, in practice it's quite meaningless. The Looter could steal 1, 15, 20, or even all of my gold when attacking, and I would still do everything in my power to defeat the Looter before it flees. I don't want the Looter to steal any of my gold, and in the scenario that he does flee, he's taking at least 40 to 60 gold and dealing some amount of damage to me. This amount of momentum loss is unrecoverable, and likely forces a reset, which isn't too unfortunate considering it's early enough in the game when this situation should occur. They also don't even receive a buff to the amount of block Smoke Bomb provides. This is an F tier buff in my opinion. Alright, we're at the first of 5 gremlins, and when encountered, 4 of them will be called randomly to be fought. The first gremlin on the list is Fat Gremlin. On Ascension 17, Smash now applies an additional status, Frail, and this is incredibly debilitating considering he is fought alongside 3 other gremlins, some of which who have also been buffed. The weak decreases the player's damage output, and the Frail increases their damage received, immediately applying pressure to the player from the very first turn. Definitely an A tier buff. The next gremlin is the Mad Gremlin, and the Mad Gremlin is a prime example of an enemy technically buffed in Ascension 17, but that buff is not super relevant. The Mad Gremlin now gains 2 instead of 1 strength when attacked by the player. The strategy is normally to not attack the Mad Gremlin until the other gremlins have been eliminated because its damage output is so comparatively low. This has to be an F tier. The sneaky gremlin sneaking his way into Ascension 17 unchanged, definitely going in the no change tier. The next gremlin is the shield gremlin, who receives a really annoying buff, especially when that block is given to far more threatening gremlins. It really only takes a single bad sequence of the shield gremlin giving 11 block to the wizard gremlin and ending your whole career. B tier buff in my opinion. And the final wizard to be discussed is the Gremlin Wizard, and yet another example of an enemy technically buffed in Ascension 17, but in practice those buffs are largely unnoticed. The Gremlin Wizard now attacks repeatedly with Ultimate Blast without recharging, and in theory this sounds super scary, but the Gremlin Wizard is already a kill on sight enemy when encountered in the gang, and getting hit by just one Ultimate Blast is game over, let alone getting hit by two. A really unnecessary, if not very flavorful buff to the wizard, but unfortunately an F tier buff overall. Alright, we're in the home stretch now, only 2 more enemies left. The Blue Slaver is a strong enemy who receives a likewise strong buff to its attack pattern, becoming far more aggressive, being unable to use the less damaging move Rake twice in a row. However, to compensate, when Rake is used, it has been buffed to apply an additional round of weak, ensuring the player is weak the entire combat. Rather frustrating in isolation, and certainly grueling in combination with other slavers in Act 2. Definitely an A tier buff. And finally, rounding out the normal enemies of Act 1 is the Red Slaver. Another strong enemy similar to its blue brother. However, the Red Slaver is far more dangerous, as its scrape applies vulnerable, and it has access to Entangled, a status move that prevents the player from playing attack cards for an entire round. If the Red Slaver gets this off in Act 2 during the Taskmaster Elite fight, it's good game. Like the Blue Slaver, the less damaging scrape is called less frequently. However, it has also likewise been buffed to provide an additional round of the vulnerable status to compensate. This may well be the only S tier buff for Ascension 17 in Act 1. Alright, and that's it. Those were the Ascension 17 changes to all the Act 1 normal enemies, and here's my tier list for where I ranked those buffs. Did any of them come as a surprise to you? What do you think of my ranking? Do you agree or disagree? How would you have reorganized them differently? Who do you think are the biggest winners and losers of Act 1 in Ascension 17? Perhaps there are some large Acid Slime fans out there that will have some choice words for me in the comments. Tell me what you think in the comments, and like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video to stay notified for my next one in the Ascender's Guide to the Spire series. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!